Do you think a red Jeep with a license plate, HOA1, could really tear through 3 acres of farmland, destroy $32,000 worth of crops, and crush an 18-year-old boy's college dream in the process? This isn't a Hollywood movie. It's a real-life battle between a third-generation farming family and a powerful HOA president who drove straight through their fields like it was her personal backyard. What she didn't know: that fancy clubhouse she parks under, yeah, it's sitting on the farmer's land. What started as a seemingly minor dispute exploded into a full-blown legal war, a media frenzy, and even a viral movement called #CornJustice. The community split. The HOA started to crack from within. And then a bright yellow bulldozer rolled up to the infinity pool like a warning shot. Never underestimate the people who work the land. Backhand index pointing right, love jaw-dropping plot twists, HOA drama straight out of a movie, and stories where everyday folks rise up for justice? Hit subscribe on Real HOA Drama now. We tell the true stories of real HOA battles, and trust us, you won't believe what happens next. I used to think nothing could make my heart race like a July tornado or the first crop after a brutal winter. But that morning, with dust clouds rising and corn stalks falling like soldiers under sniper fire, I stood frozen. 3 acres of corn, 3 acres I had planted, watered, and prayed over every night, begging the skies not to rain too hard, not to burn too bright, were being torn apart under the wheels of a bright red Jeep. And not just any Jeep. It was that Jeep, the one with the vanity plate, HOA1, driven by none other than Barbara Whitfield, president of the board at Maple Creek Estates. I stood there, my knuckles white around the handle of my old radio, trying not to hurl it through her windshield. The crunch of tires over corn echoed like a red pen scribbling out my grandson's college dreams. The wind carried the scent of torn stalks and fresh mud into my nose, just in case I needed another reminder this nightmare was real. Barbara didn't slam the brakes, didn't apologize, didn't even flinch. She stepped out of the Jeep with pristine hiking boots and a perfectly pressed blazer embroidered with the HOA logo, like she'd just walked out of a Fortune 500 board meeting, not driven like Vin Diesel through my livelihood. Her blonde hair was tied up in a flawless bun, not a strand out of place, even after driving like a stunt double in Fast and Furious, Farm Edition. "I'm conducting a boundary inspection for the HOA," she announced, voice cold as a January frost in Minnesota. I was silent for a moment, not because I didn't have words, but because it took every ounce of strength not to scream them in her face. And in that split second, a thought hit me, clear as sunlight filtering through the first leaves of summer. She doesn't know. She doesn't know that the land under that fancy Maple Creek clubhouse, the one with the infinity pool, tennis court, and gold-trimmed gym, is mine. She doesn't know that when my father temporarily sold part of our land to my uncle in 1962, then bought it back 2 years later, the parcel was recorded as a separate lot. A detail the developers overlooked when they built their suburban paradise 15 years ago. She doesn't know that in my pocket, buried between tractor receipts and discount feed coupons, is a bulldozer key, the kind that can turn an HOA infinity pool into a duck pond, if I so choose. I took a deep breath, feeling the calluses on my palms tighten with every heartbeat. She may not see the blood, sweat, and tears that soaked into this land, but I do. I remember planting every seed in that field with my grandson after the worst drought we'd ever seen. Every crushed stalk today is a dream strangled. But in that moment, I realized something. I didn't just lose a cornfield. I just declared war. And this time, I wouldn't be plowing with a tractor. I'd be plowing with justice. And if I had to, behind the wheel of a bright yellow bulldozer fueled by 3 generations of fury. I didn't grow up with video games. I grew up with tractors. My childhood didn't smell like fancy colognes or rubber playgrounds. It smelled like fermented cow manure and fresh spring soil. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. Walker Family Farms isn't some trendy brand. It doesn't have a sleek logo or a slogan like "Farm Fresh Since Forever." But every callus on my hands, every groove in my father's palms, and every crease on my grandfather's brow are living signatures in the story of this land. My grandfather, James Walker Sr., bought the first piece of it in 1937, right after the peak of the Great Depression. Folks called him a crazy old fool for spending his life savings on land at a time when people were selling land just to buy dinner. But my grandpa had vision. And a damn good pair of boots. He planted the first fields himself, working nights at the steel mill while teaching my father how to test soil moisture by grabbing a handful and tossing it. If it falls like autumn rain, he'd say, you're good. If it hits like rocks, get ready for a dry season. My father took over in the 60s, expanded into soybeans and wheat. Then came me, the third generation, turning our farm into a food source for over half the county. When I was a kid, the best part was not having neighbors for 2 miles. The Thompsons and the Carters were the closest, and they were farmers too. They had tractors. They respected the dirt. And they understood that if someone was up at 4 a.m., it wasn't to make noise, it was to make harvest. We lived by an unspoken code. Respect boundaries. Help when needed. And never complain about the smell if you live near cows. But then in 2010, bulldozers and cranes rolled into the east side of my land. They called it Maple Creek Estates, a name that sounded like it came straight out of a suburban lifestyle simulator for city folks. The houses popped up like mushrooms after rain, gray tile roofs, triple-car garages, glittering blue pools, and tennis courts that, far as I could tell, nobody ever used. Then came the granite gate, with gold lettering that read, "Live the life you deserve." Every time I drove past it, I couldn't help but wonder, don't I deserve a good life too?
At first, I didn't object.
I'm a farmer, I know times change. I even agreed to a 50-foot buffer zone of wildflowers to help blend the landscape. I let them use the north side of the farm for Easter and 4th of July events. But what I didn't know was that the moment those golden gates closed and the HOA signs went up, a new era had begun. One where cornfields were nuisances and farmers like me were considered the problem. I kept my promise to my grandfather.
Keep the land.
Keep the tradition.
Keep the dignity.
But I never imagined I'd have to fight to protect all of that. From a neighbor in a blazer, behind the wheel of a red Jeep, who speaks in bold font emails. If you've never met Barbara Whitfield, picture a woman who looks like she stepped out of a high-end furniture catalog, but with the mindset of a CEO who's never left the boardroom. Barbara doesn't walk, she strategically navigates. She doesn't talk, she articulates a vision. And under no circumstances does she admit she's wrong. She simply reevaluates her perspective. She arrived at Maple Creek Estates with a resume that read like a LinkedIn flex. 30 years in finance, ran a network of offices across the Northeast, retired early to focus on community development. Translation: she became the HOA president, a non-paying job with a whole lot of power. And like every HOA queen in suburban folklore, Barbara saw anything outside her control as a threat. Didn't take long before I became the enemy. First came the letter, all caps in the subject line. Odor warning from the West. The body read, "The smell of cow manure from your property is severely affecting the quality of life at Maple Creek. Please address this issue immediately." I laughed out loud. My cows are local bred, pasture-fed, and their barn's cleaner than my tool shed. Still, I responded politely. "Dear Mrs. Whitfield, I'm afraid I cannot persuade the cows to stop digesting." Next week, I got an email, longer than my tax return, complaining that dust from the tractor is interfering with the infinity pool's filtration system. The week after that, the sound of your combine harvester is disrupting the residents' morning meditation. But the crown jewel came on a Sunday morning, straight to my home phone. "Mr. Walker, I've discovered cow manure on my orchids. I demand you address this immediately, or I will be filing a complaint with the State Board for air quality violations." I stood there, phone wedged between my ear and shoulder, herding chickens, thinking, do I need to start handing out N95s to her flower pots? Sensing things were getting tense, I decided to do the one thing a real farmer knows how to do: face things head on. I wrote her a letter by hand, sealed it with wax, old school, and invited her to tour the farm. I offered to show her how we work, what we do, even suggested a ride on the golf cart if she didn't want to get dusty. She replied with a 9-word text. "I don't have time for agricultural tourism." Agricultural. Tourism. She called my life. 3 generations of blood, sweat, and dirt. Tourism. I set the phone down and looked out at the field where Jake, my grandson, was spreading fertilizer for the wheat. He was wearing my father's old cap, standing in the sun, sweat pouring down his neck. His hands trembled slightly from the weight of the bag, but he didn't stop. And in that moment, it hit me. I wasn't just living next to a difficult neighbor. I was living next to a whole world that didn't understand, and didn't care to understand, land, labor, or legacy. And from that moment on, I knew. No HOA meeting, no polite exchange, no bullet-pointed email could ever make Barbara feel what you only understand when your hands have touched the soil. And then, she did something I never saw coming. August 23rd started like any other harvest morning at Walker Farms. The sun peeked through the treetops, the early breeze carried the sweet scent of ripening corn, and my grandson, Jake, stepped out of the barn in yesterday's dusty boots, holding a soil moisture reader in one hand. He's 18, skinny but quick, with my old baseball cap on his head, the one he calls his lucky hat. That morning, he was grinning wider than usual. "Grandpa," he said, "if this harvest comes in like we're projecting, I've got enough for first semester at State AG." I nodded, equal parts proud and worried. Iowa State's agriculture program, Jake's dream since elementary school. The kid's never wanted to be a gamer, never dreamed of going viral. He just wants to learn how to grow healthier soil, build stronger seed, and one day take over the farm, not because I asked him to, but because he loves the land. And then, Barbara Whitfield, wearing a sapphire blazer like she was about to go live on CNBC, drove her red Jeep with the vanity plate, HOA 1, straight into that dream. I was checking the southeastern corner of the field when I heard an unfamiliar engine. Not a tractor. I've known that sound since I could crawl. This was the growl of rage on wheels. I climbed the dirt mound, and my heart stopped. That Jeep, those oversized, chrome-plated wheels, was ripping through rows of corn, each 8 feet tall, snapping like rifle fire through a war zone. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Someone lost control.
But no.
That Jeep zigzagged intentionally, carving a swerving path of destruction, like it was trying to write something into my land. Then it stopped, not out of regret, but because it got stuck in the irrigation ditch. Jake tore in with the pickup truck, eyes red with fury.
He didn't speak.
Just clenched the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white. I walked toward the scene, head spinning like I'd just taken a hammer to the back of the skull. The door opened. Out stepped Barbara, calmly adjusting her collar like she'd just stepped out of a nail salon. "I'm conducting a boundary inspection for the HOA," she said, voice flat and polished like a school principal giving a welcome speech. By driving through my field, I barked, pointing to more than 3 acres of corn flattened into the earth. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she snapped. "It's just corn. The HOA has a right to access adjacent land for inspection." When I told her she'd caused over $32,000 in damages, plus $5,000 in soil restoration, she casually reached into her blazer and handed me a gold-embossed business card. "If you have complaints," she said, "send them to our legal department." Then she turned to call a tow truck, not forgetting to add, "and make sure they note it was due to poor field maintenance." The police arrived 45 minutes later. They took photos, wrote up notes, and finally concluded. This is a civil dispute.
No arrest.
No citation. Not even a slap on the wrist for the woman who just rolled over a year's worth of work and a young man's college dream with chrome wheels. That night, I sat on the porch, cold coffee in my hand, watching Jake slumped over by the chicken coop. He didn't say a word, just sat there, silent. And I knew he had just learned his first real lesson about injustice. Not in a classroom, but right there on his family's field. I felt powerless. Not because I wasn't strong enough, but because the law seemed to stand with those in blazers and gold-plated business cards, not with those in mud-caked boots and calloused hands. But right then, I remembered something. I had something stronger than anger. I had the truth, the deeds, and a bright yellow bulldozer waiting quietly in the barn. 3 days after the Jeep Gate incident, Jake and I still hadn't said much to each other. not out of anger, just not knowing where to begin. Over 3 acres of corn, flattened. A loss big enough to torch his college dream and bend the spine of my already strained finances. But on the 4th day, while we were out checking the irrigation lines, Jake suddenly said, "Grandpa, maybe we're missing something. I mean, have we ever really gone through the land documents?" I looked at him, frowning like he'd just suggested we ask Barbara for help. But then I paused. Jake wasn't just guessing, he was smart. That boy didn't just grow up around tractors. He once helped me sort through old land records back in 10th grade. "Where do we start?" I asked, caught somewhere between curiosity and desperation. Jake nodded. "We start with the old maps. The ones the HOA never bothered to check, but might just save this farm." So we dug in, deeds, plats, purchase agreements from so far back even God might have forgotten the dates. I opened my father's old wooden chest, where he kept everything that mattered. Beneath a faded photo of my grandfather holding a bundle of barley, we found it. A strange little contract from 1962. It detailed the temporary sale of a parcel to his younger brother, followed by a repurchase 2 years later. Then ding. Jake lit up like he'd struck gold. "Here it is, Gramp. This piece, 0.8 acres, just behind the wildflower buffer. It was never merged back into the primary deed. It's listed as a separate parcel." We looked it up on the county's GIS system, and my heart started pounding like a war drum. The HOA's $1 million clubhouse, complete with infinity pool, stone tennis courts, and a chrome-plated gym, was sitting right on top of it. They hadn't just encroached. They'd built illegally. I sat there in silence, not from shock, but because, for the first time in days, I saw a flicker of light rising from the ashes of our crushed corn. I picked up my phone and called the one person I trusted with the law, Samuel Grant, our family's lawyer since Reagan was in office. "Sam," I said, "I think I've got a legal nuclear bomb here." 3 hours later, Sam was standing in my kitchen, tie askew from the 60-mile drive like he'd just fled a war room. He scanned the documents, cross-checked the maps, and typed like a federal-level hacker. Finally, he nodded, slowly, like handing down a verdict. "Tom, they built a multi-million-dollar facility on your land. No permit. No compensation.
No clue.
And you have the legal right to—" I cut him off. "To what?" Sam squinted, then gave a sly smile. "To make them tear it down. Or negotiate in gold." I leaned back in my chair, mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. Part of me wanted to laugh, scream, maybe even cry. Another part just felt sad. If they'd shown respect from the start. If they'd just listened instead of treating the HOA handbook like holy scripture. But they didn't. And they picked the wrong man to push around. My name is Tom Walker, legal owner of 0.8 acres. And now, the man holding the doomsday button for all of Maple Creek Estates. I always knew there were people on the HOA board who didn't fully agree with Barbara Whitfield. The awkward glances during community meetings. The half-hearted nods when I waved at the neighborhood gate. And that one time, James Wilson, the vice president of the HOA, leaned in and said quietly, "I used to live next to a farm in Ohio. Cow manure never killed anyone." But that day, James didn't just nod or drop a casual line. He showed up. Right after whispers of Tom Walker might be suing the HOA clubhouse started circling through Maple Creek Estates like wildfire. I was out front, hands still greasy from fixing the irrigation pump, when he walked up. White shirt, no tie, and an expression I hadn't seen before. The look of a man about to lay down his cards. "Tom," he said, just above a whisper. "I can't stay silent anymore." I wiped my hands on an oil rag, eyeing him cautiously. "What do you mean?" He glanced around, then pulled a small USB drive from his shirt pocket, along with a printed email. Barbara went rogue. She never informed the board about her so-called boundary inspection, let alone that she did it with a Jeep. I clenched my jaw. I'm guessing she didn't mention the part where she flattened 3 acres of corn either. James nodded grimly. Then he handed me a folded note. "I recorded the closed-door meeting last week," she bragged. "I drove through Walker's field. Just ran it over. The guys all bark, no bite. No lawyer, no case. I didn't even feel anger at that point. I'd felt too much already. What I felt now was power. For the first time, I had something more than land. I had evidence. James continued, voice raspy like he was committing treason. I also printed the original boundary maps, the ones she purposely didn't forward to the HOA's legal team. That clubhouse, Tom, it's clearly off by a margin.
And she knows it.
I sank onto the porch steps, rag still in hand, but my heart pounding like it had just gotten a shot of pure adrenaline. Not only did I have the law on my side, I now had proof she knowingly broke it, and a man on the inside of her own fortress. Why are you helping me? I asked, squinting at him. James sighed, eyes drifting toward the field swaying in the evening breeze. I used to be a structural engineer. I believe in boundaries. In foundations. Barbara, she's tearing both apart. And you're the only one with the guts to stop her. I nodded. I know what I need to do. But like you said, it has to drop at the right time. He slipped the USB into my pocket and gave my shoulder a firm pat. I won't be in the spotlight. But you've got my statement if it comes to that. We parted like quiet allies in a war without rifles, where the enemy wasn't an army, but arrogance in a blazer, shielded by HOA bylaws and the lust for local power. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, a single yellow lamp casting its glow onto a mug of strong black coffee. I stared at the USB like it was a torch in my own private rebellion. I wasn't alone anymore. And when the truth drops, at the right moment, in the right place, it won't just bring justice for me. It'll bring down a suburban queen who thought she could roll over everything with a red Jeep. Tuesday night, 6:58 p.m. I walked into the $1 million clubhouse of Maple Creek Estates, where the walls are paneled in imported oak, the conference tables made of solid mahogany, and the curtains probably cost more than last year's entire soybean crop. I wasn't there to admire the interior. I was there to dismantle an illusion. The illusion that land is something you can take without consequence. In my hand was a brown folder. Inside, certified boundary maps, the original deed, an audio recording from James Wilson, and a signed letter from my lawyer, Samuel Grant. Not exactly traditional weapons, but for a third-generation farmer like me, it was my shield and spear of justice. Across the table sat the 5 members of the HOA board. Barbara Whitfield presided like a CEO ready for a crisis briefing. Blue blazer, pearl brooch, and that half-smile I'm sure she practiced in the mirror. Mr. Walker, she began, with a voice sugar-coated in sarcasm. We understand you're still emotional about the boundary inspection. But do remember, we're here for the good of the community. I said nothing. Just opened the folder and laid the certified boundary map across the gleaming table. Silence fell. I'm not here to complain, I said, locking eyes with Barbara. I'm here to inform. I pointed to the pink-shaded section on the map. The clubhouse, the infinity pool, the tennis courts, all sitting squarely on 0.8 acres of land I legally own. Barbara let out a light laugh, the kind you use when you still think you're in control. You're not seriously suggesting we tear down an entire clubhouse over a few crushed corn stalks, are you?
I didn't laugh.
I didn't get angry. I simply answered, voice calm and cold as winter steel. I'm not tearing anything down. I'm reclaiming what's mine. You have 48 hours. If I don't hear a reasonable response, the bulldozer rolls in. The silence in that room was heavier than a summer storm waiting to break. James Wilson, silent now for strategic reasons, cleared his throat, but said nothing. Another board member, Eleanor Chambers, a retired judge, leaned forward to study the documents carefully. And Barbara? She slammed her hand on the table. This is extortion, she barked, her voice cracking for the first time. This board will not be blackmailed by cheap threats. It's not a threat, I replied. It's a legal right, when I'm fully prepared to defend in court. What I'm offering is a courtesy. Barbara turned to the board. I demand an immediate vote to reject this outrageous claim. And so they did. Under Barbara's pressure, the board voted against my request. 3-2. Not because they didn't believe me, but because they weren't ready to stand up to her. Not yet. I nodded, calmly packed my documents, and turned to leave. But just before I reached the door, I stopped. I turned back and spoke, loud and clear enough for every person in that wood-paneled room to hear. Mrs. Whitfield, I think you misunderstand. I'm not here asking for permission. I'm here issuing a warning. And when my bulldozer comes, it won't need GPS. It'll follow the legal boundary line. You have 48 hours to decide. Keep your pool or keep your pride. The door closed behind me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the wind shift. I'm not the kind of man who likes courtrooms. I'm a farmer. We settle things with handshakes, with a couple of apple pies, maybe by fixing a fence together. But this was different. Barbara Whitfield wasn't a neighbor. She was a blazer-wearing storm armed with a jeep and the HOA bylaws like they were weapons of war. Samuel Grant, my lawyer, filed an emergency motion to confirm ownership and seek a ruling on the illegal construction. 3 days later, I stood before Judge Harriet Michaels, a woman I'd heard grew up on a dairy farm and once took down a major construction firm in a river encroachment case. In the courtroom, the HOA attorney threw everything at the wall. Adverse possession, community benefit, minor dispute open to negotiation. But Judge Michaels simply pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose, flipped a few pages, and said flatly, "The law requires a minimum of 20 years for adverse possession. You've had 15. And community benefit doesn't apply to private clubs. This is straightforward. Mr. Walker owns the land. The HOA Clubhouse violates that ownership. He is entitled to removal or a settlement." I nodded. No fist pump. No victory yell. Just a quiet clench of my hand, the way my father used to do when the wind shifted right as he sowed the fields. That night, Jake came into the kitchen, phone in hand, eyes wide like he'd just seen a UFO. "Grandpa, remember that video from the other day when she drove the Jeep through the cornfield?" I frowned. "You filmed that?" "Yeah, with the drone. I posted it on TikTok just so my friends could see what really happened. But now..." He flipped the phone toward me. The video had passed 1.5 million views. Caption: HOA president goes full GTA on farmer's cornfield. Hashtag corn justice. And the comments? A wildfire of outrage, support, and, of course, memes. Justice for the corn. Touch Grandpa and we riot. She really thought she was Thanos snapping the whole field away skull. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or be alarmed. But then the phone rang. On the other end was Mallory Jenkins, a retired English teacher from Maple Creek Estates, corner house on Buckingham Court. "Mr. Walker," she said, voice heavy with guilt. I saw the video. I had no idea it was that serious. Barbara told us you made it all up to extort the HOA. "Come to the farm," I said. "I'll show you the maps, the deed, the court order. All of it." And they came. The next day, over 20 residents knocked on my door, carrying coffee, muffins, and a list of questions. I spread out the documents on the kitchen table like it was a courtroom. The certified boundary map, Judge Michaels' ruling, photos of the damage. They listened. Every word. And when I finished, Mallory stood up. "We were lied to," she said. "Barbara didn't just insult you. She insulted the truth." People who once saw me as that dusty old man ruining the landscape now nodded solemnly. One boy even asked to take a selfie with me. "I told my friends," he said proudly. "You're the hashtag corn justice guy. You're a hero." I laughed, really laughed for the first time in weeks. Not because of the title, but because I realized the battleground had shifted from the cornfields to people's hearts. 7 a.m. Saturday. I climbed into the bright yellow Caterpillar D8, glowing like the first sun of fall. A 90,000-pound beast with a blade sharp enough to carve a line straight through history, rumbling to life with a growl that made the whole of Maple Creek Estates hold its breath. I wore a plaid shirt, a worn ball cap, and in my breast pocket, the court order signed by Judge Harriet Michaels. I wasn't driving with anger. I was driving with purpose. This wasn't about me and Barbara anymore. This was for every person who'd ever been belittled for standing their ground. As I rolled the beast out of the barn, I wasn't alone. The local press had arrived at 6:30, tripods set, mics tested. Someone had tipped them off. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe someone who wanted to see justice written in steel tracks and resolve. The county sheriff, in full uniform and aviators, stood beside Samuel Grant, my lawyer, who held a stack of legal documents like he was carrying the Constitution itself. And in front of the clubhouse, a crowd of Maple Creek residents stood in complete silence. Every eye fixed on me. Barbara Whitfield stood on the clubhouse steps, flanked by 2 security guards like a president facing a coup. Same blue blazer. Same heels she wore the day she ran over my cornfield. But the confidence had curdled. Now it was fear, masked as fury. I guided the bulldozer right up to the edge of the infinity pool, its surface calm and perfect, reflecting the morning sky. As if no war had ever been fought here. I lowered the blade. The whole neighborhood held its breath. Stop. A voice rang out. James Wilson, HOA Vice President, burst through the crowd, arms raised. We agree. The board has voted. Barbara has been removed. We accept all of Mr. Walker's terms. I hit the brakes. The massive treads sank into the earth. But the blade stopped just inches from the pool's edge. James, panting, raised a handheld mic and spoke clearly, like he was reading a declaration. Last night, after the #CornJustice video went viral, the residents of Maple Creek held an emergency meeting. Result: 87% voted to remove Barbara Whitfield from office. The new HOA board unanimously agrees to all of Mr. Walker's proposals. I shut off the engine, stepped down in a silence that wasn't awkward. It was reverent. At that moment, the 2 security guards stepped toward Barbara. Ma'am, one said, you need to leave the HOA premises. She protested, flailed, shouted. I'll sue all of you. This is a coup. This is. But no one listened anymore. Her red Jeep peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching. The last scream of an era that just ended. And as it disappeared past the gates of the neighborhood, the crowd erupted. Applause.
Cheers.
Whistles. I saw Jake in the middle of it all, grinning wide. Thumbs up high. Eleanor Chambers, former judge, now interim HOA president, walked up and shook my hand. Mr. Walker, she said, eyes steady. On behalf of Maple Creek Estates, we are truly sorry. And we thank you for reminding us what ownership means, what patience means, and what resilience looks like. I didn't respond right away. I just turned, looked toward my fields, where the morning light was hitting the tender green stalks that had just begun to rise again after being trampled. They were standing tall again, just like me. 1 week after the morning my bulldozer stopped inches from the infinity pool, I received a check for $50,000, enough to cover the ruined crop and the cost of restoring the land. Along with it came a long-term land use agreement from the new HOA board, confirming that my 0.8-acre parcel remained under my ownership, and that any structure built on it would now require clear, fair, and respectful consent. No more of that "this is a luxury neighborhood, you're just a farmer" nonsense. Another week passed, and I opened the front page of the Maple Creek Estates community newsletter. Right there in bold print was a public apology. Not the usual, "We regret any inconvenience" corporate fluff, but a sincere letter, penned by Eleanor Chambers, the newly elected HOA president, titled, "From Corn to Clarity, What We Learned from Mr. Tom Walker." I kept that newsletter, framed it even, not out of pride, but because it marked something real, change. The next month, Maple Creek held its first ever Farm Heritage Day, named in my honor. Walker Heritage Day. They asked me to cut the ribbon. Booths lined the green selling roasted corn, fresh honey, and garden vegetables. Kids ran laughing across the lawn. Adults lined up to buy tomatoes I'd grown myself. No one pinched their noses at the smell of manure anymore. They leaned in and asked, "What did you fertilize this with? It's so sweet." Jake, my grandson, became the lead instructor for the Grow Your Own gardening program. Every Sunday morning, He stood beneath the old oak, whiteboard in hand, teaching how to grow carrots that don't turn bitter, how to tell weeds from sprouts. The same suburban moms who used to worship Barbara? Now they showed up with baskets and called Jake "Lil Professor." The small park in the middle of the neighborhood, the one that used to have just flower beds and white benches, got a new name: Walker Fields. A bronze plaque was placed at the entrance, etched with these words: honoring agricultural heritage, where land not only feeds people, but teaches them how to live with one another. I still farm, still wake up at 5 a.m., still drink black coffee with no sugar, still check soil moisture and yell at Jake, half-jokingly, when he forgets to shut the water valve. But there's one thing that's different now. I no longer feel surrounded. I have neighbors now. Not just people who live nearby, but people who've learned to understand. I didn't win a battle. I changed a community. And as I stand in the wheat field, now golden under the evening sun, I think back to all that's happened. The roar of the Jeep, the crushed corn, the courtroom tension, the bulldozer rumbling forward. And I know someone will ask me someday, did it really have to go that far? I'll answer, calmly but firmly, you don't always need a bulldozer. But sometimes, it's the only way to make people understand that land, legacy, and respect can't be flattened under the wheels of arrogance.